Ears are one of the most delicate body parts due to their intricacy and thinness. Thus, they need special care in reproduction. This video describes the methods involved in artistic ear casting, rather than medical ear casting. Instead, we will explain the two most common artistic methods used in ear casting. The first method is usually employed by special effects artists to create a complete ear, often cast in silicone and flesh-colored for a realistic-looking ear. The second method is the one employed by life-casting artists who are creating a three-quarter or whole head casting. In that case, creating the perfect ear is a requirement for professional-looking results. The ear is so complicated that it has its own nomenclature. Each portion has its own name. The ridge around the perimeter of the outer part of the ear is the helix. The inner ridge is called the antihelix. The valley between the helix and the antihelix is called the scapha. The rise of the antihelix is called the antihelical fold. On the side closest to the head, there is a V-shaped valley under the helix toward the top of the ear called the fossa. Below that is another valley, and that's called the concha. Below that, there is the ear canal known as the external auditory meatus. The round nodule toward the bottom of the ear is called the targus. Opposite that is the antitargus. Finally, there is the lobule. The materials required are soft or distilled water, 16-ounce plastic cups, a mixing bowl, a soft translucent silicone rubber, we're using SkinRite 10, a fast-setting alginate, we're using Hollywood Impressions, a gram scale, a measuring cup, a wire kitchen whisk, an X-Acto knife or a box cutter, craft mixing sticks, latex or nitrile gloves, and serious silicone pigments to color the silicone. The quickest and simplest way to cast an ear is by cutting a 16-ounce Dixie cup in half and retaining the part with both open ends. The model is then seated and given a pillow upon which to lay their head. One ear's down on the pillow, while the other to be cast is, of course, facing up. The cup is placed over the ear with the model holding it in place, and then the alginate is mixed until it's creamy and smooth and slowly poured in the mold cup until it has covered the ear to about the depth of 1 inch at the highest point of the ear. This thickness is important since the mold is being made without the standard shell mold. The thickness of the alginate alone is enough to support the mold for casting. The alginate is poured slowly to one side and allowed to envelop the ear rather than pouring haphazardly. This method pushes out any trapped surface air, which later may result in air bubbles. Wait at least 2 minutes after the alginate has set before you demold, and when you do so, demold slowly and carefully. The mold should slowly pull away from the ear. Inspect the mold for any loose particles and then flip it on its back. After you finish inspecting the alginate mold, return the mold to a fresh plastic cup. Mix the silicone according to the manufacturer's instructions on the label. In this case, we use a 10-to-1 mix ratio silicone. We place a cup on the gram scale and measure out 28 grams of part A. We add a bit of the silicone dye to achieve our desired color, and then we pour out 2.8 grams of part B and mix well. Mix so the color is completely uniform, which takes a few minutes. Failure to obtain a thorough mix will result in a tacky or soft spots in the rubber. Pour the silicone in a high, narrow stream in one spot, letting the silicone envelop the ear mold. Continue covering the ear to a depth of about 1 to 2 inches above the highest point of the ear mold. Once the silicone has cured, you can cut the plastic cup down its side and remove the finished ear casting. You'll need an X-Acto knife to clean up any of the flashing. Molding ears of a partial or full head cast separates the inexperienced from the experienced life caster. In this section of the video, we'll explain a method developed by the late Dave Parvin that you can use that almost always results in high-quality ear castings. It's a given that ears will always be the most fragile part of a casting. Because of their intricacy and their delicate nature, ears are perhaps one of the most difficult body parts to cast without flaws. That's because it's difficult trying to get any alginate casting materials to cover the ear evenly without voids or air traps in the inner areas of the ear. Another issue, besides developing the correct molding technique, has to do with the material itself, because alginates are too delicate to deliver tear-free results during a demolding process. Finally, alginates are just too thin when mixed to stay in one place without running off the surface of the ear. To solve the material issue, a specially formulated alginate called fibergel is used to create ear molds. It's extremely strong as it's reinforced with fiber. It can also be mixed very thickly, like peanut butter, which allows it to cling to an area and stay in place without drips. The mix ratio for fibergel for molding an ear is 5 ounces or 142 grams of fibergel alginate to 1 pound or 454 grams of water. While some may think that this ratio is too thick and will cause surface bubbles, that certainly is not the case. When fibergel is mixed properly, it's more viscous, so it stays in place better than any other alginates of the same consistency. Putting on only as much as will stay put requires some experience and a familiarity with the particular alginate one is using. It's important to carefully push the alginate into the ears and check it several times, as getting the alginate to the back and to the underneath of the ears is the most problematic. This is especially true if the subject has very short or no hair. The late Dave Parvin, a renowned life caster, teacher, and sculptor, explains his method of casting perfect ears in the May 2004 Sculpture Journal. Alginate may tend to run or drip off from behind and below the ears, even if properly mixed. After the alginate has been applied over the entire surface of the cast, I take a small amount of polyfill or synthetic pillow stuffing and dip it in what is left of the alginate. I use about enough to cover the palm of my hand, so that soaked it's about 3 inches long and 3/4 of an inch wide. I then place this alginate sausage behind and below the ear. Care must be taken to keep from pushing the ear outward, making a classic Dumbo look, so that I can concentrate on the alginate application as a whole. I usually have someone else gently hold the alginate impregnated cotton in place with their fingertips until the alginate has set up. While this only takes a couple of minutes, I instruct the alginate holder to stare at what they're doing. If one looks away, there's a good chance that he or she will allow the piece to slide out of place. The other frustrating part about casting ears is that even if you get a satisfactory casting, the removal of the alginate mold often leads to breakage of the delicate ears. You can only use so much superglue. But there's a solution that solves most of these problems. The answer is to remove the alginate-laden cotton or polyfill that was placed behind the ears during the mold making. It needs a sharp instrument to cut it out, such as an X-Acto knife. A dull one doesn't cut it. But once it's removed, you have a cleared fill port to add the casting material. But proceed with caution, as you can only want to remove the plug and not touch any of the ear itself. Once opened, you can force the casting material through it with your fingers. Continue to push the material through it as it starts to set to make certain that the ear is completely filled. This will provide for a completely perfected cast ear. But it's not perfect in that the back of the ear will be filled in. There's a reinforcement that will prevent future ear damage. However, if this is not a satisfactory look, you can carve away the filling, but be careful. The whole purpose of this method is to create and maintain perfect ear casting. You don't want to break a perfect ear by trying too hard to carve away the backfill of the ear. With the use of these methods and some needed practice, you will soon become an expert at casting perfect ear.